At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu Al-Samad.
None of us is traveling. I'm not driving right now.
I'm home in my basement, just, where any good podcaster should be.
Yeah. Really? Podcast in your basement?
I am tonight. Usually I do it from my office, which is upstairs. But my laptop that I usually record on, the audio is acting up. And so I'm on my big machine, which is down in the basement.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, you sound extra damp. And,
I've got a big NVIDIA Titan GTX 1080 GTX powering this machine with an AMD Ryzen 5 and lots of RAM and solid state storage. So we're good to go.
That sounds super cool. Like it's quiet. The last machine I built sounds like a freaking jet engine.
Yeah, no, they've gotten a lot better with the fan designs on these things. So this one actually is surprisingly quiet, given especially the amount of GPU that's in this thing.
All right, well, we'll take advantage of it. So we'll talk about what we're driving, then we're going to talk about the Audi E-Tron Quattro, the Cadillac XT4, and you were out in the Lincoln Nautilus drive, so you can fill us in on that. But first let's talk about what we've been in, and it looks like you have been in a couple of things.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of weeks since the last recording because you got tied up with some day job stuff last week. So since we last talked, I've been through two very different cars, but both very appealing in their own ways. So first up, I had the BMW 230i. Which I can say right now without reservation is my favorite BMW that I've driven at least since the i8. The 230i, the 2 Series right now is about as close as you're going to get to, what were some of the great 3 Series, of the 90s. Like the E36 3 Series, it's smaller than the current 3 Series. The 230, the 2 Series in BMW's current naming scheme, anything that starts with an even number is a coupe, convertible, or grand coupe, as they like to say.
Grand coupe or grand coupe?
Well, whatever. Yeah. There's no D in there, so it's grand coupe. GRAN. So a 2, 4, or 6, or 8 Series is going to be a 2-door or a 4-door coupe. And then the odd numbered ones, the 1, 3, 5, and 7 are sedans. So
they're not that different though. When you like the 4 doors, I don't know. And we don't have to split.
Yeah. Regardless, the 2 Series is the smallest of the coupes that they have right now. So it's smaller than the current 3 Series. And, the last time I drove a 2 Series, actually at that time it was still a 1 Series. It was back, 8 or 9 years ago. And it was even smaller than it is now. It had a very tight back seat. This current 2 Series has a slightly more usable back seat, but what's really special about it, is the 230i has the 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged. It's comparatively light, nimble feeling, and it's just a lot of fun to drive. It's plenty quick. It's got lots of power. It's, I think 270 horsepower. Maybe not quite that much, maybe 260, 250. But it feels quick and nimble and has better steering feel than a 3 Series. I think it's pretty. I think it's a good looking car. It's got more of the profile of the older 3 Series coupes, and it was just really
enjoyable
to spend a week with, even without a manual transmission.
Right. It's like it's a proper BMW. Like and we'll talk about it when we get to what I'm driving too. But they haven't forgotten. Right. So it sounds like that was a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah, no, there are cars, I mean, the two series, for the people that, love, that grew up loving the 3, when Car and Driver was, for the first 25 years that Car and Driver was putting it on their 10 best list. The 2 series is the car for those people, those that think that Car and Driver should have dropped the 3 series from the 10 best list about 10 years ago. They're the ones that will appreciate this car. It's just so much more fun to spend time with. I don't know. It's hard to describe.
It sounds like you really liked it, though. What was your favorite thing about it? Was it just with the ride handling balance, or just the way the whole thing seems
the way the whole thing comes together? It's got the right balance of pretty much everything. It's not overpowered and it's not underpowered. So this is the least. It's current. The current entry point for BMWs in North America, and it just has the right mix of pretty much everything: the style, the size, the weight, the handling, the ride and handling. Even with the M Sport package on there and the bigger wheels and tires, it was still it did great on Michigan roads. It didn't pound you and didn't pound your backside all the time. It was just great to be with.
And so this is the 230i, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, because so did you have xDrive, or was it just the rear wheel drive?
No, it's just a rear wheel drive, which was even better. So when going around corners, if you got into it a little bit, you could get the back end to come, to help turn in a little. It had just enough of that. Not so much that it was going to be, doing anything stupid, but just enough to have really a lot of fun with. And, of course, since it's a modern BMW, it's not inexpensive as soon as you start adding some options onto it. Base price on a 230i coupe, starts at only $35,000. The one I had was like $47,000.
Well, I mean, that's not too bad. So the M Sport package is usually pretty pricey. That's usually like, I don't know, $3,000 or something ridiculous for some things that say M and the bigger wheels. That's not too bad though. A little $10,000 spread.
And the other thing is, it's really remarkably fuel efficient. I got 34 miles per gallon with this thing, and I was not trying hard.
And that's with the start stop and all of that stuff. Like it defaults to on, and I'm assuming it.
But that that assumes that you actually stop long enough for it to shut the engine off.
Yeah, that's true. And it has an 8-speed automatic now.
It's an 8-speed automatic. It's got paddle shifters, and the transmission's responsive. You tap the paddles and it switches gears pretty quickly. So there's I would have obviously preferred a manual, but you can't really get one anymore. And if I had that, I would have had even more fun with it. But this was still a lot of fun to drive.
Yeah, I think that
that's what a BMW should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's good to know that they've still got it, in some ways. I remember really, really liking the 1 Series. And when I drove the 1 Series, I think, and this was back in like 2010, so this was 8 years ago or something. Or it might have even been 2009. So it was just like a lowly 128, and it was the same thing. It was just as tidy. It does what it's supposed to do. It feels like a proper BMW, and it's also like even the $35,000 starting price, like that's not terrible, but it's also for the size of the car, like that, it's a little pricey. But I think that with the BMW doing the proper BMW things, it feels like you're getting value for that price premium, because you could go buy a different brand and spend less money and get more content.
Yeah, I mean, if they still offered it with a manual transmission, I mean, this is the car that Casey List would really want over the Golf R. Because it is more of a classic BMW.
Tried to talk him out of that Golf R, and he wouldn't listen to the GTI. That's oh well.
Hey, it's his money. Whatever.
It's fine. They're all entertaining. I'm surprised. I guess I'm not really surprised that they don't offer it with a manual transmission, but I'm surprised that even BMW is kind of thrown in the towel on it. I figured that they would stick it out to the sort of the very end, because they do everything else the sort of like the BMW way, right? So it just must really not be that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 3 Series, the base 3 like the 330i, or maybe it's the 340i, and the previous generation M5 were among the last ones that they offered, and the M3 and M4 are the last ones that they offer with a manual transmission. And the new M5, you can't get a manual anymore. So it's down to the 3 Series is the last one. And it's just it's just the way the market is. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, you can get it with a manual transmission. Never mind. I misspoke.
Wow.
You can get the 230i with a manual.
So there's
the perfect BMW,
right? Because
assuming, of course, you're willing to deal with the kinds of issues that Casey was dealing with on his BMW, which made it cost a hell of a lot of money to keep it on the road. Well,
but that's not unique to BMW. Like, yeah, it's the price of admission for the premium European brands, because I had some of that same nonsense with the Volvos. It's just that they had no resale value compared to a BMW, but it was some of the same glitches, just sophisticated systems. When they start to age, they start to get finicky and flaky, and I take a step back from the BMWs and their contemporaries, and you look at them and they're almost designed to sail through the typical lease period with very little care and feeding. So they'll get to 60,000 miles pretty much without a whimper. But once they get up to 75 or 80,
very expensive very quickly.
Yeah, everything just explodes. And I think that that's because they're designed to not cost anything when the captive finance arm or, some bank or something owns the car. And then when it becomes a more traditional used car, you're on your own, folks.
Yep.
They used to have a very much more intensive upkeep regimen. It was, check these fluids and replace and, do all these things at, 15, 30, 45,000 miles thereabout. There was a more, and now it's like that's like the severe service recommendations, and it's basically like, don't do anything and just drive it and make your payments, and then renew the lease.
Turn it in.
Right. And so you kind of have to expect that. And the thing about BMW is that there's that enthusiast base and some aftermarket support. So it is expensive if you have a shop do it. Every car is expensive when you have a shop do that stuff. When they're as sophisticated and sort of, I don't want to say delicate or flaky, but there's a lot of stuff that becomes delicate and flaky on cars like this that you have to expect it and attend to it. And that just, it's the price of admission. And it's not unique to BMW, but it's an annoyance factor. But when you're driving a brand new one, you're going to get like 4 or 5 really good years out of it.
Yeah. Just make sure you get the 3-year lease and turn it in at the end of 3 years and move on to something else.
Yeah. I mean, 248 horsepower from the turbocharged engine, That's like you were saying, like that's just really well balanced because the car weighs probably like what 3,500 pounds or something, maybe a little bit more.
3380.
So it's lighter. So,
3411 with an automatic.
So 3380 with the main. There's your Fox body Mustang powered
BMW
away.
standards, that's relatively svelte. It's not the lightest car in the world, but it's also got just a really nice size, and the whole thing's really well balanced. Basically 50-50 front rear. That's one of the advantages you get out of a front engine rear wheel drive car. Is you can get a lot. Especially with a relatively small engine up front. You can get that better weight balance. So it's it's going to feel more responsive.
Yeah. Well, because it's lightweight, so it'll turn in pretty readily and stuff that See, I wish you could get them now with still like 16-inch tires or 16-inch tires and wheels as the max. Because like a 3,300 pound car does not need 20-inch wheels. There's no reason you need tires that big.
Well, this one was on 18s. So
okay, 18s is like all right. That's about as small as you're gonna get these days.
Yeah, 17s are standard, and this one was on 18s, I think.
All right, okay. So the more you talk about it, the better it sounds to me. Like a 6-speed manual. I guess it's a coupe only. So if you want the convertible, you can't get it. But I think the convertible will be a whole different experience.
I mean, especially on something like this, it's going to be a little more of a tourer with the soft top, as opposed to something like a Miata or a Fiat 124, which is it's more of a pure sports car with the top off. But this one, I think as a coupe, this one works really well.
All right. And did you have anything to say about like the iDrive 6.0 or the
it works. It's fine.
It works.
I had no fundamental complaints with it. I didn't. I tried the nav. The voice recognition in the nav works, like it does in any other BMW. It's not, it's the nav interface, is still, I wouldn't say it's the most intuitive, but I think, with the iDrive controller, you can actually get around it pretty quickly. In fact, I can get around it much more quickly than I can in a typical touchscreen system.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it's good. Driving this one again proved to me, why touchscreens do not belong in cars. And, any car that relies entirely on a touchscreen has made a serious mistake. So
I don't know any
that's
cars
a fundamental flaw.
Wait, there are cars that rely entirely on touchscreens? I don't know what you're talking about.
There's something. I guess there's some company out in California that builds cars that don't have any switchgear in them.
Huh.
But they have no idea what they're doing anyway. So
yeah, wonder what else they're leaving out. Anyway, so you liked the BMW 230i.
Yep.
What else? You also said that you liked the other car you drove.
I really liked the car that replaced it in my driveway, which was the 2018 Kia Rio EX. So this is the latest version of the Rio, just launched this year or last year. And I think you had a Rio recently too, didn't you?
I did. I had a Rio EX launch edition, so it had the launch edition package, which gives you some of the red accents in the interior.
Yeah, I think. This one was also the launch edition.
Yeah, so I really liked it. So I'm interested to see what you thought of it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of affordable cars, new cars available on the market anymore. They're getting fewer. I mean, cars in general are getting fewer and fewer, in between. But, if you're looking for something that's affordable, that has a warranty on it, that's going to get you where you need to go, it's going to be reliable, and that doesn't feel like a penalty box. This is, this and like the Honda Fit, I think are your two of your best options. And, this one, I really like the Rio. Lately, the last several years, pretty much all the Kias I've driven, I've liked. way more than you would expect. I don't know why I say that, because there's no reason, with a modern Kia to expect anything else. But I guess I still have in my mind, some of that residue of the 90s when Kia, first launched as an independent brand here in North America.
Well, that may be. I think it's also too. Some of the other competitors, even like a Yaris or something, it's going to be a solid car, but it is also like not really a whole lot of joy there. With
and this one is actually fun to drive.
Right.
It's a 1.6 liter naturally aspirated 4, 130 horsepower. In the LX version, the base version, you can get it with a manual transmission, but if you go for that, you're also going to give up a few niceties like power windows, and I think cruise control or Bluetooth and USB are missing from that one, from the base version. But you can get that for $14,000, which is a bargain. The EX, starts at 18.
And that's the sedan though, right? That's 14. Or is that the hatch?
I think you can get either one for that price.
I think. Can you? All right. It's been a little while since I delved into it, but it seemed to me that the hatch was a little bit more. It had a little bit
maybe. Yeah.
But either way, it's still a deal.
Yeah. But even if you step up to to the LX or the EX, I should say, which is the top of the line version. It starts at $18,400, which is, by today's standards is remarkably cheap. Hold on a second.
Yeah. And the other thing I found was like with the EX, there's not really anything to add. Like they did put the launch edition package and it sounds like all the press ones, but that's not even that expensive of a package.
Yeah, I mean, for that price, you're getting a 7-inch touchscreen audio system. Well, okay, we just had that discussion, but it has support for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. You get Sirius XM radio in there if you wanted to use such a thing. There's Bluetooth, adjustable seats, split folding rear seats. Adults can sit a pair of adults can sit in the back seat, fairly comfortably. Did you actually find that? Because that was my thought. Was like the back seat seemed small. It seemed like a normal car. It seemed almost like a segment up in terms of size for the front seat. And I felt like they cannibalized the back seat and maybe the cargo space. Compared to a Fit, it's definitely not as roomy as a Fit. But I set this. I'm 5'11", and I set the driver's seat where I would normally put it, and I climbed in the back, and I fit in there. My head was not touching the roof. My knees were not touching the seat in front of me. Okay. I didn't have a whole lot of extra clearance, but average size adults could fit. 2 average size adults can fit in that back seat. You probably don't want to take a cross country road trip in there, but to go out for the evening or something like that, it'll be fine. It's not. Yeah. You're not going to be scrunching yourself in there. In the BMW, first of all, because it's a coupe and you've got that, forward slanting rear window, the back seat's going to be very tight. You won't want to be sitting in the back seat for more than a few minutes at most. But, the Rio, you can sit in the back seat with no problem. And because it's a hatchback, you can also fold down the seats and you've got tons of cargo space back there. And it's got a surprising amount of features for the price point, for $18,000. And like I said, if you get the launch edition, you get red leather front seats, with red accents on the dashboard. And, it actually looks surprisingly nice for the price point. Out the door, including the delivery charge, was just over $20,000. Right. So, that's a deal you're not going to find almost anywhere else. And, this is actually, a surprisingly fun car to drive, even with the automatic transmission. It's fairly nimble. If you push it hard, it'll understeer. It doesn't have a whole lot of grip, but if you know what you're doing, it's one of those cars that it's light enough that you can toss it around, and have some fun with it. Without at speeds that aren't going to get you thrown in jail.
Yeah, I liked that it didn't have a whole lot of grip because I could drive it aggressively, shall we say?
You can drive it to its limits.
Yeah. Like on an on-ramp at 40.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you know, because the suspension is relatively simple. So it's you know where the limits are. You can find them. It's not that sophisticated. And that doesn't mean that it's rough or anything, but I think it does have a beam axle in the back, which, you know, it brings back.
It has a beam axle in the back, but it does have 4-wheel disc brakes, which the Nissan Kicks that I drove a couple weeks ago had drum brakes in the rear.
Really? They're doing drums still?
Yeah, the Kicks has drum brakes.
Why would you do drums? So I don't understand. Like,
they're cheaper and lighter.
Are they really cheaper though?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're definitely cheaper than discs.
But there's more components.
But it's more expensive to manufacture calipers. It's a more complex system to do disc brakes.
Huh. I would assume that, like, because drums are so much older and you got all those like springs and wheel cylinders and.
Well, you know, the other thing is, especially on the rear wheels, you know, for the parking brake, that actually adds some extra complexity.
Oh, that's right. You've got to put a stupid
disc brakes.
Yeah.
You know, you might, depending on how you do it, it might be a drum and hat, or the caliper may have a mechanism in there that, you know, ratchets the piston out when you pull the parking brake lever. So it does add some cost and complexity. So doing drum brakes is actually a lot easier on the rear and a lot cheaper. Huh. Yeah, I mean, they don't perform as well, but they're definitely cheaper.
I mean,
so
drums. It's, not to go on a complete tangent. They do work, and they self-energize.
It's just harder to modulate.
Yeah, and in the rear, they're fine. Whatever.
Yeah, and since your front brakes are doing, especially on a front wheel drive car like this, your front brakes are doing 90 to 95% of the work most of the time. So you know your rears are just kind of along for the ride anyway most of the time. But ideally, you know, you want discs all around because discs are much more linear in their behavior. You know, you increase the pressure by 100 psi and you get a certain amount of extra brake torque, and you add another 100 psi and you still get the same amount of incremental brake torque. With drums, it's very nonlinear.
Yeah, don't they need that?
Every
like,
little bit of extra pressure gives you more and more torque.
They need that like initial shot to move all the stuff, and then because they self-energize. Like you said, they're a challenge to modulate because they're actually like they brake harder and harder and harder kind of on their own. So yeah.
And on the rear brakes, on the rear axle, that can actually be a real problem.
I mean, who doesn't like to spin?
Of course, for that price point, you know, you do even on the EX, you do give up a few things like, you know, you don't get a push button start. You have an actual physical key that you have to insert into a slot and turn to start the car.
Oh, the horror.
I know.
I will say though, you know, because we always get cars.
Sacrifice, but you know, I mean, these are the things we do for our listeners.
Yeah, exactly. I will say, because we get cars with push button starts all the time now, and like the keyless entry and stuff, it does take you. Sometimes it takes the whole week, and you never get used to the fact that, like, oh yes, I need to pull out this device and manipulate it to get into the car and then to start the car.
Well, this one does have keyless entry, so you know you press the button on the key and it unlocks the doors. But then you do have to, you know, flip. It's got, you know, the little switchblade key thing where the blade pops out of the fob, and then you stick that in and do your thing with it. Yeah,
it takes a little while to get used to again. That's all.
Yeah, and you know the fuel economy on this thing was great. You know, got 35 miles per gallon, which was better than the label. You know, there's really not a whole lot to complain about. You know, I mean, like I say, if you want a new car that is very affordable, you know, if you don't have the budget for a BMW or a lot of other mainstream cars, you know, this is a great choice. And, you know, Kia, for the last 3 years in a row, they have ranked on top in the J.D. Power Initial Quality Survey. And they've also been, Hyundai has also, you know, in the last couple of years has moved up into second place. So, you know, their quality scores are really good. You know, better than, you know, any of the premium brands from either Japan or Germany.
Yeah, like they make a good product, and every one that I drive I'm impressed with. I will even go as far as to say I like the Rio better than the Fit, even though you're giving up some of the sort of flexible interior, outfitting or just capability. I mean, the Rio just seems like such a sort of honest little car, and it's straightforward to drive. Everything works like it's supposed to, and it's enjoyable to drive. And I know I like the Fit; it's still fun to drive, but I don't know. It's almost for whatever reason, maybe it's just that I think the Rio just generally like looks and feels a little better than the Honda. It's been a while since I've been in a Fit too, so. I don't know.
The new Rio is a good looking little car too. It's it's pretty slick.
Yeah. All right. Well.
All right. What about you?
Ringing endorsements. So last week, I had a let me pull it up because I almost forgot. I had a Volkswagen Beetle convertible, and I almost forgot because everybody else has forgotten about it too. The last time I had a Beetle, I said the same thing I'm going to say now.
You had the Beetle Dune.
Yeah. This car, it's like it served its purpose. I feel like it's no longer relevant. The people who remembered the original Beetle are the ones who were excited enough for the relaunch of the Beetle back 20 years ago now. And it's, everything the Beetle does, the Golf does better because it's a little bit, more squared up in its shape and just overall it doesn't make so many sacrifices for form. But, if you like the style and the sort of the kitschiness of the Beetle, yeah, it's there. And there's really nothing to complain about with this convertible. It's nicely finished. It has an insulated top. It's a power top with one touch. It latches the header and everything. It's one of the rare sort of affordable 4-place convertibles. So that's nice. And it drives like a Volkswagen. So it's pretty solid on the road. Still don't like the DSG. Like parking lot speeds and low speeds, it has this real aggressive sort of launch off the line, and there's still these like little elements of snatchiness to how it sort of operates in a low speed environment that just bug me. I just wanted like a manual where I can just let the clutch out a little bit and then put it in neutral and coast and stuff like you would do, but.
Is there even a manual available in the convertible?
I don't think there's a manual available at all in the Beetle anymore. But we can look while we chat. But
yeah,
it's a Beetle convertible. There's not a whole lot to say about it. It's now going into its final edition anyway because Volkswagen has announced that 2019 will be the last model year for the current Beetle. Yeah, well, I mean, sales have been cut in half every year for the last however many years. It's just this year's sales are half of what the year before was, and which were half of what the year before that was. Like that's been the pattern for Beetle sales, and it's hard to.
Well, I mean, the good news is that when you keep cutting it in half like that, you start to reach an asymptote. The relative reduction every year goes down. as you approach zero, that curve flattens out.
Didn't think of it that way. At a certain point, you have zero buyers for the car you have bothered to make, which is a problem for them.
Which is why it's going away after the 29 model year.
Yeah, and
19 model year.
Yeah, and it's fine. Like it is what it is. It's a stylistic exercise at this point, and I think any enthusiast sort of like. Stuff has sort of been excised out of it, exercised out of it. There's not really any sort of high performance variant, like it'd be great if it was set up with Golf R drivetrain. That would be kind of interesting.
Well, it does nominally have the same engine that's in the Golf R. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo.
Yeah, it's
unfortunately, unlike the Golf R, it only has 174 horsepower.
Yeah, it feels really down. Like it's not slow and it doesn't feel winded, but it's not
Well, I mean, this is the same. This is the same output as this version of the engine that's in the Touareg, which I drove a few months back. And in the Touareg, I found it incredibly underwhelming.
Yeah, I guess it's like I just expect more out of that engine because I know it can do more. And
right,
I don't know. That's naturally aspirated power levels. So why bother with the turbo?
Especially for a 2-liter. I mean, you got to wonder why they even bother to put a 2-liter turbo in there. Why not just 174 horsepower is what you typically get. Somewhere in that 170 to 180 range is what you typically get from a naturally aspirated 2-liter. So why even bother with a turbo? And it's not like you're getting huge gobs of torque either. I mean, it's only 184 foot-pounds. This is about the same output as the 1.5 liter in our Honda Civic.
Yeah, and then the Civic is probably torqueier. It probably has a broader torque curve because of the smaller engine with the turbo on it. Just that tends to be the thing.
Right, and that, I think that's why, this engine doesn't feel particularly good in any application.
Yeah, it just, I mean, and it's fine in the convertible because, like, again, it's kind of one of those, like, who cares? You don't have the convertible to go fast. And the rest of the chassis is, it's a Golf chassis, so it does okay, but it's, the Beetle is set up like it's a Boulevardier of Boulevardier. It's
cruiser.
A car to go
it's
to
a cruiser.
Yeah. I did like the design touches. It is nice. It had like the wood look trim across the dash, and the ergonomics are very good in it. The seats are mostly comfortable. I did find it interesting that with the convertible,
Volkswagen usually does a good job with things like that. Especially seats. Yeah. Their seats are usually really good. Yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to complain about either. It's just like overall, it's kind of like it's a shrug, and I think that's why it's dying with a whimper. It doesn't even, me as a Volkswagen enthusiast, like that was the first air cooled VWs were sort of my entree into real car enthusiasm, and I just I can't get worked up for the Beetle, so that tells me something. Maybe it's me. I don't know, but I also thought it was interesting with the convertible. The seats, they're vulnerable to getting water spots, like in the rain and stuff. So the car. So it stains if you get spots on there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're like actual stains, but you could definitely see that like there was water spots on the seat from where. And I figured it out because it rained while I had it. You open the door and the water comes off the roof and it lands on the seat.
Oh,
like the lower seat. I thought somebody had taken it to the beach.
The sort of gutter that's on the top is not really draining the water the right way.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a convertible, so I mean, I think if the water just goes where it goes.
If you look at them, there's usually they try to make they fold the fabric around to create a rain gutter on there, but it's not always as effective as you'd like it to be.
Yeah, I think that was the case. It was not as effective. But it's a convertible for now. This is one of the few convertibles that's under $30,000 that will seat more than two people, and do it in a little bit of a fashion. But yeah, I don't think you can get a manual with it. And I honestly, I don't think anybody cares.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like you said, I mean, I think in general, people have largely stopped caring about the Beetle, which is why sales have been dropping and it's going away next year. Although there are some reports that it will return in a few years, but as an EV next time. That's fine. You know what? Like, bring it back when it makes sense, or if they need to make a splash. Like, I'm fond of the Beetle in concept. Well, what would be fun is if they did an electric Beetle and made it rear wheel drive. Put the motor in the back. That's. I mean, I think that as we start to see more electric platforms, that kind of thing may be more flexible because you're not packaging the same kind of a powertrain as an internal combustion engine, right? So you have a little bit more size flexibility. And so we'll be able to see maybe some more of those different stylistic exercises happen with the same component set. Maybe it's just
the same problem, just a different shape. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
well, before we leave the topic of the Beetle, I've got a little side story here. For those that aren't aware, back when before the new Beetle was reintroduced as a production model, there was a concept car in the mid '90s.
The Concept One.
The Concept One.
I did. It was in high school art class. I did a linoleum block print.
Oh, did you?
Of the Concept One. Yeah, I carved it out with my knife, and yeah.
Well, the designers of the Concept One were Freeman Thomas and Jay Mays. And both of whom went on to join Ford after their tenures with the Volkswagen Group. Freeman Thomas for many years led the Ford's West Coast Design Studio, their advanced design studio, and Jay Mays actually rose to become the VP of Global Design at Ford. So he was in charge of all design for a number of years. Until he retired at the end of 2013. Anyway, Mr. Mays has resurfaced in the past few days. While I was out in California the other day, an announcement came across the wire that he has a new job. Can you guess where Jay Mays is now?
I do know the answer is I don't know the exact name of the company, but I know it's an appliance company.
Yes. Jay Mays, the designer of the Volkswagen Concept One and longtime Ford design boss, is now the chief design officer for Whirlpool.
So Whirlpools are now going to look like Volkswagens with Whirlpool cues, because that's what he did at Ford. Basically, like the Ford 500. If you ever wondered why it looked like a contemporary Passat, was because Jay Mays was like, make it look like a Passat with Ford cues.
Yes, but taller.
I mean, yeah, I think that
bulbous.
was in... That's the rumor. I was not actually there.
Yeah, I think they kind of built in some of the Beetle curvature into the roof line of that one. So it was kind of a mix of Beetle and Audi A6. But blown up even more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to say about it, but Jay Mays, like any good, I think automotive design figurehead, has a bit of controversy that follows him around about whether he's really, really good or he's, sort of just coasting.
Overrated.
And copying what other folks have done. And again, I don't actually have anything to say about it because I don't think you can comment on that from the outside looking in. When you rise to a design director, you're a leader. You may actually do very little design, but your job at that point is to inspire and motivate the team.
Exactly.
So,
and the reality is that, in the automotive world, there is never just one person that's responsible for the design of a vehicle, especially, I mean, with rare exceptions, like at some very small companies, for example, Franz von Holzhausen at Tesla, I think, he is largely responsible for the shape of Teslas. Henrik Fisker at his companies, he's been largely responsible for what his two companies have created. But in general, at any larger automaker, there's never just a single person. I mean, there might be one person who, typically the way the design process works is, they will, a whole bunch of all the designers in the studio will submit sketches. And, from those, they will select some themes. And then that, the theme that ultimately gets chosen for production then gets worked on by a whole bunch of people to refine it, to turn it into a production model. So there may be one person who came up with the basic concept of what the car is going to look like, but ultimately there's, a whole bunch of hands involved in what the final version looks like, for better or worse. And that's just the reality of it. It's you can't do it with just one person anymore.
Well, and any good designer is going to have hits and misses, right? You have a career, you hopefully it's long. There's going to be some stuff that's more successful than others.
If you don't have some misses, as a designer, then you're not pushing hard enough.
Yeah, and the other guy who I think consistently comes in for criticism, which I feel is really undue, is Chris Bangle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm not in love with everything he's done.
With with that 7 Series.
Yeah,
But, there were some follow-on vehicles that actually were pretty decent.
So look at it now. Okay, that 7 Series, yes, when it debuted, it was not the most elegant thing. But it moved, by the end of its run, it was better. They had cleaned it up, and that kicked off the E90s and the E60s. And you look at those now, and an E65 Series is a really attractive car in its own way. And the E90 is, again, it's also attractive. So,
and even the first Z4, I think that has actually aged really well. A neighbor around the corner has one, and I think it's actually a really good looking car.
I love the Z4. I love that continuous line that goes from the headlights all the way across the top of the fenders and down the door. Like, it's just that one sketch line, and it's actually a bone line, I think is what they call it in the studios. But it's lovely because it just frames the whole front 2/3 of the car in this nice graceful arc. It's lovely. It's a nice piece of design. I have a lot of time to look at design when I sit in traffic. So yeah.
You had something else too. What else did you drive?
Yeah, sticking with BMW. I've currently got an X2 xDrive 28i. So I don't know what it's priced at. I haven't finished out my time with it. I'm assuming this is going to astound me when I look at the sticker. I'm assuming it's going to come in at like 50, because it's got it's got a nice interior. It's got the M Sport appearance package stuff inside, which is, again, it's expensive. But man, I really like the X2. I think it's really well done. And again, like your thoughts about the 2 Series that you had, it's a BMW that hasn't forgotten what BMWs are supposed to do. It's a solid driving car. I think it's handsomely designed. I think it's good looking. It's finished nicely inside. It has a lot of things that I'd expect from BMW. The controls are pretty similar. It feels like a 3 Series, 5 Series, 7 Series. You know where the things are. You know what they're supposed to do. That consistency is really nice. And it's not the sportiest thing, but you bend it into a turn and get on the power. Like if you're coming off a cloverleaf ramp or something, and it'll transfer power rearward and do whatever it wants to with torque vectoring, and you can feel it rotate the car. So it has actually some of that sportiness to it as well. It's not. I'm sure it's not as good to drive as the 230i that you drove, but it's also not bad, especially when you consider that I think this shares pretty much everything with the Mini Countryman, right?
It does, yeah. It's built on the same platform as the Countryman, and also the European 1 Series, which we don't get over here, and the 2 Series Sport Tourer, I think it's called, which is a taller wagonish hatch, kind of a C-Max style vehicle, which we also don't get over here. But yeah, it's a transverse engine, front drive / all-wheel drive platform.
Yeah. And it, you're not going to be fooled that it's a rear-wheel drive BMW, but it's also like, it's essentially a front drive hatch that doesn't drive terribly. It rides and handles with some grace. The ride's a little stiff, and part of that's the run flat tires, of course, and probably the larger wheels for the M package that it's got.
Does yours have the heads-up display and navigation?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, that's the M Sport Premium tier, which starts at $45,650.
That's a whole lot of money for this thing.
It is.
It's. I mean, it's nice, but I mean, 45 grand. No. It is quite nice though. And I like that. The 230 has that funny spring loaded shifter. This is, again, it's not the highest trim level or highest model in the range. So, the shifter on this, it's a standard kind of, you pull it backwards for all the gears and you push it forward for park. Makes sense. It's nice.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah, it's familiar. Some of the criticisms I have is like the rear visibility is not very good. because of the small rear window. I guess some people have noticed headroom complaints. Again, like I'm not a real good person to test that because I fit in everything. So, not a problem for me. The cargo space is decent. This is about the size of what you would get from a compact wagon, which is essentially what it is. I don't like the start stop because of the transverse engine. You feel all that driveline lash, because it's flopping front to back. So you feel it. But it gets decent fuel economy for doing that. So, I wish it had, especially at $45,000, I wish it had dynamic cruise control, which it does not have. It feels like there's still some features to go here, which, like, again,
that is available as an extra option for another $700.
Come on, that is all the money. And I even like the little badge on the C pillar that I know the internet was hateful about. It's just a detail, and it's fine.
Well, as usual, the internet was wrong.
Well, I mean, I think the 2002s had a badge there, didn't they? All the Neue Klasse
I believe
cars?
so, yeah.
Yeah. So whatever, they're going to do what they do, and you're either going to accept it now or accept it later, because that's how it works. So get used to it. Yeah, I mean, again, it's a BMW. There's not a whole lot to say. I do like it a lot better than the Mini that it's based on. And the Countryman is good. I liked the Countryman E a lot better. I think one of the things that I liked about the Countryman E that is nice is it didn't do so much of the sort of engine flopping around bit, because it would step off with the electric motor, and then it would fire the engine once you're rolling, which just feels a little smoother. So if they want to port that powertrain over to the X2, they could have a thing.
I think it's only a matter of time before that vehicle appears.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody who lent us their cars. We should talk about another electrified German now.
So they're starting to come out of the woodwork. The new premium EVs from Europe. Last week or a couple weeks ago when we last recorded, we talked about the Mercedes-Benz EQC, which was unveiled in Stockholm. And this week I was in in San Francisco on Monday for the global reveal of the new getting all confused. The Audi E-Tron Quattro, which it's a crossover. It's in between a Q5 and a Q7, closer to Q7. So it's about 3 inches shorter than a Q7, 2-row, 5-seater. And it looks very much like the concept that we saw 3 years ago at the Frankfurt Motor Show. It has changed very little from that. The grille has been tweaked a bit, but other than that, the shape and everything else about it is pretty much the same as what we saw 3 years ago, which is not a bad thing. I mean, it's a decent looking, mid-size crossover. If you like the Audi design language, you'll be quite happy with this. And its shape is actually very similar to the new Q8, which just launched the week before. Although the Q8 is actually slightly longer than a Q7, so you have similar kind of shape on the e-tron and the Q8. Just one is a little bit smaller. And
Audi is excellent at. They're another one that they're just fantastic at defining a design language and then propagating it across everything in a way that's just really consistent. And I know there were some complaints about how underwhelming this is because it's not a wacky looking thing. But I think that, to me, that actually works in its favor. It's a normal car with electric propulsion.
Actually, in person, it actually looks really good. The fenders, have a little bit of a bulge to them. It's got a fairly muscular look to it, and it rides on 20-inch wheels with 255 section tires on there. So I mean,
that's an enormous tire.
This thing's on some big tires, which sounds like they're needed to support the curb weight of this thing, which is not exactly a lightweight.
Well, there's that, and for the size too, the total luggage capacity is like 28 cubic feet. I guess that's good, but I don't know. I thought it would be more.
Well, what they've done is, they put the rear seat further back, so you've got lots of leg room in both the front and rear seats.
I see.
So this is a little bigger. Like I said, it's bigger than a Q5, a little bit smaller than a Q7, and there's no third row available in this one. So you've got that cargo space, and the rear hatch kind of leans forward a little bit, which gives it a little bit more, coupe-like, a little sportier appearance than the Q7 in particular. The Q7 back, the back of the greenhouse is a little more squared off and boxy compared to this one.
Yeah, well, and the good thing for Audi is it makes their signature Quattro all-wheel drive and torque vectoring almost too easy to pull off, right? Because they're using the electric motors now for a good part of that instead of shafts and gears and differentials and stuff.
Yes. So, yeah. I mean, fortunately, because the entire space between the front motor and the rear motor is filled with battery. They don't have to have a drive shaft going from the front to the rear. You just have the two motors. It's a very similar layout to what you get in a Tesla. And like what we're increasingly seeing in all new EVs, with the underfloor battery, the battery pack is about 13 inches thick. It's got 32 modules in there with 12 cells in each one, lithium-ion cells, 95 kilowatt hours of capacity in there.
Is that a lot comparatively? I'm trying to draw on a blank in terms of like for that size and weight. And just, I guess, among the competitive set,
it's comparable, to the top Teslas right now are 100 kilowatt hour packs, so slightly more capacity, but the weight is in that same range. It's in that 1,500 pound range. And this one, is actually also designed to be serviced. And I talked to the engineers from Audi while I was there. And they wanted to put a big emphasis on safety and durability of the battery. So, one of the things that they've done, you've got these 32 modules in there, and the case that they're mounted in, there's actually partitions between each module. So they probably could have condensed this a little bit more if they wanted to, but what they did was they've effectively isolated each of the modules from each other, so that if something does happen in any one module, if there's some kind of thermal runaway in one module, it'll minimize the risk of it spreading to the rest of the battery.
Oh, that's clever. And that's always the question, like when automakers bring their electric wares around, I can always count on the one hand going up and talking about the sort of longevity of the battery and the safety of the battery. And I think the honest answer is, like, at this point, really, they're on it. They've thought about it way more than you ever will. And especially for, an automaker like Audi, which is, Volkswagen. So they have a lot of lines to support. They do a very good job about making sure that it's going to last. The battery's going to last a long time and be solid and safe. I just don't feel like that's not a concern for me anymore with an electric car is the battery. Like,
right. And, the e-tron has support for 150 kilowatt charging, which, is a bit higher than what you get with superchargers right now. Superchargers right now from Tesla max out at 120 kilowatts. So they, Audi says you can charge it, up to 80% charge, from fully depleted state in about 30 minutes. And next year when this design is kind of an interim design that they wanted to get out. Next generation vehicles will be built off the same architecture that's being used for being developed for the Porsche Taycan that comes out next year, and that one actually has support for 350 kilowatt charging. But Audi's partnering with Electrify America, which is another division of Volkswagen of America. Electrify America is the company that was formed out of the Dieselgate settlement to invest $2 billion into EV charging infrastructure in the U.S. And so they're in the process of, they've started building out their network of stations. And what they're doing is they're following a similar kind of approach to what Tesla did with the supercharger stations, where instead of concentrating them on the east and west coasts and just a smattering in the middle of the country, they're actually doing a more even distribution across the entire country and hitting, I think it's something like 120 miles, every 120 miles along all the major highways, there will be an Electrify America station, and all of the stations will have, these are by middle of next year, they will have 500 locations up and running.
So are those like every 120 miles east-west or north-south or both?
Basically spread pretty much east-west. So initially, like the first phase, they're building out in several phases over the next 3 or 4 years. So the first phase, will be 500 stations across 40 states and 17 major metropolitan areas, and every one of those locations will have, depending on where it is and what the expected demand is, they'll have from 4 to 10 charging points. So in places where they expect more demand, they'll have 10 charging ports at each of these stations, with support for both 150 and 350 kilowatt charging. So they'll support the Porsches that are coming as well. And by the middle of next year, they expect to have 500 stations either running or under construction and running by the end of the year. And
so like that's like the last step, right? To adopt more widespread adoption of EVs. People have proven that they will buy them, and they will like them in a very enthusiastic way. It's just getting them charged and being able to do that coast to coast drive. So that's why I was asking, like, I could leave here in Boston, and if there's one every 120 miles, like I know I'm not going to have a problem.
Right. And this thing's going to have, initially it's going to have about a 240 to 250 mile range. So you'll be able to go just about anywhere with one of these.
Does the DC fast charging, like that beats up the battery though, right? That's not something you want to do a ton of.
Right. Well, and that's always the risk with DC fast charging, especially when you get into these higher power charging systems. There's a risk of degrading the battery. But Audi, said they've put a lot of effort into the thermal management of the battery to make sure it doesn't get too hot. It's a liquid cooled battery, and as it gets up to 80%, then it starts to taper off, and the charging rate slows down to make sure you don't overcharge it and because it's usually, if you're going to cause any damage to the battery, it's usually, at the top end as you start to get full. When you overcharge it, that's when damage tends to occur. So, so, hopefully that shouldn't be a problem. We'll see, once they come out. They've actually been in production. They started production about 2.5 weeks ago at their plant in Brussels, which is now that plant is dedicated to building EVs, and it will be building this E-Tron Quattro that we saw this week, as well as the E-Tron Sportback, which will be launching next year, which is on the same platform, but it has the sloping hatchback body style like the A7 and A5 Sportback. And when you buy one of these, American customers that buy an e-tron will get 1,000 kilowatt hours of complimentary DC fast charging at Electrify America stations. And then beyond that, they'll have various plans, so you can buy buckets of kilowatt hours, or just pay a la carte when if you're not planning to use it frequently.
So, it's interesting that they've put so much effort and funding behind basically making up for the diesel scandal. Although this seems like stuff that wasn't really kicked off by the diesels. Like this stuff was underway.
Yeah, development of this vehicle actually started in 2013.
Yeah, so the diesel scandal shifted money around basically to say, all right, look, we're sorry.
It's sped up a lot of projects.
Yeah. But like that, I honestly, like, that's the key, is the charging infrastructure has to be there. And, I'm thinking even like as we start to get more of these as journalists, like I'm gonna have to figure out how I'm gonna charge all these EVs that are gonna wind up in the fleet, right? I don't have a garage, so I don't have a level 2 charger. So that'll be interesting.
You can put one on the outside wall.
Yeah, I'll just, you know what? I'll just get the jumper cables and I'll do a tie-in on right above the fuse box, whatever. All 200 amps, just.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, nothing. Price wise, you're paying what? You're paying Tesla money for this. Which is fine.
Actually, a little less than Tesla money. Okay. So base price in the U.S. is going to be $74,800 for the I think it's the Prestige or Premium Plus, and then the Prestige model goes for $81,000, 81 and change, and then they're also doing 999 copies of the Launch Edition, which has special paint color and a few other options. It's basically loaded. Everything is included in that one, and that one's going to go for $86,000. And because we're talking Volkswagen here, who hasn't sold that many e-Golfs yet, they're all of these for at least the next couple of years are going to be eligible for the full $7,500 federal tax credit plus whatever state and local incentives you get.
That's a really good point. Tesla has run out of that.
Yeah, there's their phase out starts on January 1st, so they've hit the 200,000 sales cap. So from January 1st, their tax credit drops to $3,750 for the next 6 months, and then the second half of next year it drops to $1,875. But Volkswagen and Audi will still have the full $7,500 available for a while yet.
So that brings the price of even the Launch Edition down to under $80,000.
Right, and a Model X starts at in the mid like 85,000 now, I think, and most of them are going for well over 100,000. Once you start optioning them up with all the adding autopilot and all the other things that they offer on there, the average transaction prices on a Model X are up to around $100,000 or more now. And you can actually, if you go for ludicrous mode and all the other stuff, you can get it up to about 140.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but the e-tron is way prettier than the Model X.
Oh, yeah.
The X is kind of ungainly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody from Audi, Mark Danke, who's the communications manager for Audi of America. And, one of the things that he brought up is they don't actually see the e-tron as a competitor for the Model X or the S, for that matter. They don't see themselves as a competitor to any of the current Tesla products for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Tesla fans are unlikely to be swayed anyway. They want Teslas, or at least a significant proportion of them do. And if you look at the segment, where this particular vehicle, this initial e-tron Quattro is competing, it's a bit smaller than a Model X. It's only a 2-row versus a 3-row. And I think it's about 8 inches shorter. So it's a smaller. It's basically a size class down from the Model X. And certainly, in terms of pricing, a maxed out e-tron will just barely get you to where a 75 kilowatt hour Model X starts at in the mid 80s. So, the way they're looking at this is rather than necessarily conquesting sales from Tesla, they're more interested in keeping the people that want an Audi. And the tagline that they used when they unveiled the car on Monday night was "Electric goes Audi." So, what you've got here is a car that has all of the usual Audi DNA in it in terms of the way it looks, the way it drives, the features and functionality that it has, but it happens to be electric. So what they're doing is they're targeting Audi customers and, trying to expand the market for EVs to people who want something different from a Tesla. but still want something that's stylish and premium, and it has all the features that they expect in it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think that's actually probably a smart move, at least initially. For the first vehicle or two that they for the next couple of years, until they get themselves more established as a serious player in the EV marketplace.
Yeah, well, and I think too, like because the diesel issue has been such a thing, those who want efficiency in their Audi SUV are going to have a place to go now. And the Q7 TDI was not cheap.
No.
So if you can't get that, you can get this, and it's got that conversation starter powertrain, just like a TDI, right? And it like, because image is part of it, or just sort of having that like neat technology kind of thing. Audi has made its bones with some technology, and I think that still holds true. Where they say we do it the Audi way, we do it like nobody else, and I think that's important to the buyers too. It looks really well turned out. I have no doubt that the materials and fit and finish are going to be top notch, because it's Audi and they know how to screw a car together. Yeah. So and like the competition is just really starting to heat right up with all of these different EVs. Jaguar, now Mercedes, now Audi. There's
Porsche
a lot
in a
of
couple
choice.
of months, and
yeah.
And we saw the BMW iNext also, but we don't really need to talk about that one. One other neat feature of the e-tron is it'll be the first car on the market in Europe, at least, with virtual mirrors. So it'll have the camera-based rearview mirror system with OLED displays embedded in the door panels at either end of the dash, basically right at the base of the A-pillar, pretty close to where you'd normally be looking at the mirrors. We'll have these OLED displays, and then sticking on a thin little stalk sticking out where the mirror would normally be are a couple of cameras that are looking back, and the advantages to that, they said that their head of development, I was in a roundtable with him on Monday afternoon. He said that those virtual mirrors drop the drag coefficient by about 10 counts. So with standard mirrors, it's the e-tron has a drag coefficient of 0.28, and with the virtual mirrors, it drops to 0.27. And what that gets them is about an extra mile of range from every charge, which is not insignificant.
No, it's not nothing.
Yeah. And I talked to one of the engineers that worked on this system, and he said that because one of the concerns is having that light coming off these displays, especially when you're driving at night.
That is my yes. You knew what I was going to say.
and that's actually why they opted to go with OLED displays in there instead of regular LCD displays, because the way an LCD works, is you've got this matrix of tiny little shutters basically, and there's a light behind that.
Yeah, they have to be backlit.
As the shutters flip around, that's what creates the display, and it lets the light through. And there's always some light leakage from an LCD. It's never completely black. Whereas an OLED, every pixel is generating its own light.
Right. Yes.
So when it's black, when it's off, it's completely black.
That's that. So, and that's nice. Yeah, because you can. It basically works like a lightning bug. Yeah. I forget what it is. It's not bioluminescence, but it's similar.
It's a similar concept.
Yeah.
And at night, it'll automatically be dimmer than it will be during the daytime. So if you're driving down the road at night, if there's nobody behind you, it's basically going to be essentially dark. And it's only when there's something lit up behind you that you're ever going to see anything on that display, which is pretty much what you'd get with a regular mirror. If you're driving down a dark road at night and there's nobody behind you, there's not going to be any light reflected off the mirror, and you're going to get essentially the same thing off this display.
Yeah, and it does open up some interesting possibilities too. I want to try it and see how I acclimate to it, because I'm not a huge fan of extra screens anywhere. But again, like if they've thought of it and they've tried to work it out, I want to try it and see what it's like. It also, if you go from like a traditional camera sensor to like an IR sensor, now you can show things in that display that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise.
So there's ways to enhance it and, add additional functionality to it. Plus, not having that mirror out there, and especially on a utility, you typically have larger mirrors, so that reduces the blind spot that you have at the base of the A-pillar.
Right. That's true.
And the other thing too is no matter where your seating position is, those things are always going to be set correctly to give you the proper view of what's back there. Opposed to, a lot of people, incorrectly set their mirrors. They end up seeing too much of their fender instead of seeing what's on either side of them and behind them. And these will always be set correctly. So you will always get the right view from those displays. I
mean, in a way that's great, but it also takes some of the sport out of it,
That's true.
I'm excited for this to actually start winding up making deliveries. I think it's actually going to do a lot.
Deliveries start in Europe in about a month or so. They're in production now. They'll be shipping to dealers soon, and then it comes to the U.S. In the spring. So we get it in the second quarter of 2019, and they're expecting the U.S. to be the largest market for this, followed by China and then Europe.
Do you feel like there's this kind of sense of a critical mass now of EVs? Starting to really just build, like I was saying, we've seen, and especially on the premium side, we've seen in a very quick succession all of the premium automakers, and they're all SUVs and crossovers, come out with electrified, and not just electrified, but electric, like EV products to compete with sort of the market that Tesla opened up. But really, like every time you turn around now, there's another one. Is this going to just really snowball very quickly?
Hopefully, for all the companies that are putting all the money into developing these, they better hope that it snowballs, because we've got a critical mass of supply that's going to be available in the coming months. What we don't yet know is whether we'll have a critical mass of demand. And that's the big unknown. Is can they get consumers to actually buy these things?
Yes, they can.
For vehicles like the e-tron and the EQC and the Jaguar, I think it will be less of a challenge to get premium buyers to go for these things, because clearly more affluent customers have shown a willingness to buy premium EVs from Tesla. And, I think these vehicles, certainly the Audi and the Jaguar, I think have an inherent appeal to them that will, that customers will probably go for. And so I think these vehicles, at least, will not have too much of a problem selling out. It's as we start going a little bit more down market where it's going to be more of a challenge to get customers to adopt these things. One very interesting test case is going to be the new Hyundai Kona EV, which I'll be driving in a few weeks, and it goes on sale towards the end of the year here in the U.S. And that one has already gone through its EPA certification. It's got a range of 258 miles, which is one of the best EVs on the market.
And the Kona itself is just really, really good.
Yeah, it's a great little car, or a great little crossover. And they'll, Hyundai hasn't announced pricing on it yet, so it'll be interesting to see how that one does and how they price it. If they can price it aggressively enough, then they may just be able to start getting some traction with these things.
Well, and for some reason, the e-tron feels really significant to me. Just like as a development, and I don't know why, but like it just as driving towards more wide scale acceptance. But I think that you can, regardless of where the car is positioned, whether it's premium or just mainstream, that's a messaging challenge, right? Like, one of the nicest things about EVs is that they're fuel agnostic. And so they don't care what you generate the electrons with. They just want the electrons,
Right.
like,
doesn't matter if it's solar or wind or natural gas or coal or whatever else it might be.
So you can take that, you can almost turn that weakness, that perceived weakness of like, oh, charging infrastructure is still being built out. Yes, it is. But also, you're not tied to like, oh, they don't have diesel, or, this takes premium gas. Like, nope, this takes electricity. It doesn't matter how you make it. So I'll be interested to see how they do that.
But that, there's actually some challenges associated with that, from a utility standpoint. And, this is one of the things that my company, works with companies on, is figuring out where to locate charging stations, because it's not as simple as just saying, following along, along an interstate, and every 120 miles you drop one of these down. It's actually a lot more complex, because especially if you're going to do high power DC charging, now you need a lot of electrical capacity to feed those chargers.
Right. Where are the transmission lines? Where's the transformer yard? All that stuff, right? Like,
yeah. And, if you're going to be taking power off the grid, if you're not generating it locally, with your own solar and wind, if you're going to be taking power off the grid, when you plug in a vehicle, unless you have set up that station with a bunch of local battery storage, on-site battery storage, to provide the transient power, that 150 or 350 kilowatts. If you try to pull that straight off the grid, there's this concept called demand charge. For commercial, for you and I, for our residential electricity, we never have those kinds of spikes of demand, or we shouldn't. Let's put it this way: if your house shouldn't be having those kinds of spikes of demand, because if it did, it would probably be on fire. But
very shortly, yes.
Yeah, for a lot of commercial applications, you get spikes of demand. So for residential, we typically just pay a flat rate per kilowatt hour, and it might, oftentimes it's two rates, peak and off peak rates, but one of two rates per kilowatt hour, no matter how many kilowatt hours we use, it's just straight up metered. But for commercial applications, they do demand charges, and so the amount that they pay actually is based on whatever the peak rate is during a month. So if at some point they're pulling a megawatt of power at any particular location, even if 98% of the time during that month they're only pulling 100 kilowatts for a business, they get charged based on that megawatt, because the utility has to build up capacity for the peak. So they charge a rate based on whatever your peak is. So that's why you've got a lot of places that are looking at using stationary batteries to shave off those peaks and reduce those peaks, and reducing the demand charges.
Yeah.
For charging stations, if you're going to be charging a bunch of vehicles at high power, all of a sudden you've got very high demand charges potentially if you don't set it up in the right location and do it the right way with local battery storage.
Well, so that's a whole other podcast topic, really, because when you consider that one of the selling points of an EV is its environmental friendliness. Well, when you're talking about a lot of batteries, that's not exactly a sort of light impact on the environment, given the materials that are in batteries. Now, I know that with local battery storage, you could use older tech, like lead acid, but still, that's lead and acid just chilling.
Well, yeah, there's other chemistries you can use, and for stationary storage applications, the chemistries are different, because you've got a different kind of use case for those batteries than you do for in vehicle, and plus, those batteries will typically last a longer period of time. You know, they would have a different life cycle than an in-vehicle battery. But still, you're right. I mean, there are, you know, no matter what kind you use, there's certain materials that can be problematic. Yeah. But it's something that we probably, we need to figure out how to do it.
Oh yeah, like I'm not saying that these are roadblocks. These are challenges, and so it's an interesting thing to think about and to talk about and to watch how it gets solved. I mean, it's a good thing we've got a lot of retail space that's opening up with the death of shopping malls, because we'll be able to just bulldoze the malls and build battery storage facilities. It'd be great. Yeah.
Well, you know where this gets interesting though is you start talking about autonomous mobility services, autonomous ride hailing with using EVs. Those vehicles, for the business case to work for those vehicles, they need to be operating all the time. They need to be in use, and you don't want them sitting around, on a charger for several hours a day. So that means that you're probably going to be doing DC fast charging on those vehicles. Like GM and Cruise, they set up their first depot in San Francisco to support their launch next year. In the Embarcadero area, they've got a depot with 18 DC fast chargers in there to charge their autonomous Bolts. And they're going to need multiple of those around. But one of the potential ways to there's a number of ways to get around that problem. One is battery swapping. And if you're talking about a fleet, where the fleet, whoever's operating the fleet knows the history of all the batteries. You can make the charging asynchronous from the re-energizing of the vehicles. So you can put the batteries on a trickle charge, and just swap in a fully charged battery into the vehicle.
Yeah, there's going to be some interesting stuff that happens.
Yep.
So it'll be cool to watch it all get solved. I mean, I would. There's this thing too, like autonomous vehicles that technology is coming. But really what we need to do is figure out how to actually reduce the use of vehicles and, take vehicles off the road. And by just like saying like these fleets are going to go to driverless cars. And so you've either not made a change or you've actually added traffic. Because when your business model is to give rides, like, yes, you want that car in use every second possible to generate revenue, versus a privately owned car where like we actually want to try to reduce the usage or, some other way to make those things more efficient and productive when they're parked. Like, do they feed their power back into the grid to sort of smooth out, peaks and valleys in the demand? And so there's lots of ideas and lots of interesting things to watch.
And if you're interested in more getting more help with that whole area, just reach out to Navigant Research, and we'll set you up with some consulting work, and we'll be all good.
And if you want to, we're doing shameless plugs. If you want to sell EVs, let's talk, because I would really love to do a car account, and car advertising sucks. So, let's talk about a couple of other things. You get to see a very classic showdown here, right? The Cadillac XT4, you got to do the drive, and then you got to do the Lincoln Nautilus drive. So, what are your impressions of both of those?
Well, first of all, they're not direct competitors.
Right.
The XT4 is a compact, so it's going up against the likes of the MKC, the Lincoln MKC, and actually the vehicles that Cadillac's chief engineer Todd Pollock identified as the benchmarks for the XT4 were the X1, the BMW X1, and the Audi Q3, which I thought was interesting because they're both smaller, quite a bit smaller than the XT4.
Right. That makes me think that they picked those so they can say, well, the XT4 is actually larger.
Yeah, well, that is more part of it. It's the XT4 is closer in size to the Q5 and the X3. The thing about the XT4 is, there's a lot I liked about it. I think overall it's executed really well. And in describing it, the designer talked about the design, this is a little brother to the Escalade. and kind of made the analogy to a Great Dane puppy. A Great Dane puppy, even when it's small, it's still got big features. It's got big floppy ears and big paws and everything, and then it kind of grows into those. And he talked about the XT4 design as kind of being that Great Dane puppy. So it's got big features on the small body, and talking about things like the headlights and the taillights and the wheels, big wheels pushed out to the corners. And in fact, on the road especially, it's actually really good looking. I think it has a good stance to it. It's fairly sporting and athletic. It's not a groundbreaking design by any stretch, but I think overall it's pretty well done. It's got good proportions to it.
Yeah, the design is way more successful than that analogy. I mean, that. Yeah. Because everything looks proportional, like you're saying, like the headlights and taillights and wheels and just the overall features, they look appropriate for what it is. So it doesn't look like it's carrying around like an escalated headlight cluster.
Right.
Okay. If that's how they want to justify it, fine. It's a good looking compact crossover.
Well, those headlights, especially the running lights, the signature running lights there, they're actually pretty big. I mean, if you look at how long those things stretch, how far back up the fender they go and down to the bumper, they're actually pretty good size, and similarly the tail lights are, pretty long, stretching all the way up to the roof. But nonetheless, I think, overall it's a pretty successful design. It's not, like I said, it doesn't really break any new ground. But it works, and it fits in with the Cadillac design DNA. Similarly on the inside, everything, is there, it's the materials are good. But there's nothing really exceptional about it. And there's nothing new or really terribly interesting, but it's good. One interesting detail that I think actually is really good is, they talked about the way they did the side glass, what they call the DLO, the daylight opening, and the side glass, and the way they cut the rear door. One thing you may have noticed in a lot of newer vehicles is the way the roof lines are done. When you get in the back seat, you often end up having the pillars coming up beside your head. And if you look out to the side, you'll be looking at the inside of the pillar instead of out the window. And so you get kind of this claustrophobic feeling around you sometimes. And they deliberately designed the rear glass, to stretch back further. And so when you sit in the back seat of the XT4, if you turn and look sideways, you're looking out the window. So it has a more open feeling in the back seat. And, the back seat, for the size of the vehicle is actually surprisingly roomy.
Yeah. I mean, overall, I think it's a nice, clever design. It's a car in terms of the segment that Cadillac has needed for like 5 years now. So it's good that it's finally here. How does it do?
So on the road, the driving dynamics are generally pretty good. It's available with adaptive dampers, and the sport version, and also in the premium luxury version. So the two top trim levels, you get adaptive damping in there. So it's got a really good combination of ride quality and handling capability. The steering, the weighting is good, but there's not really any real feedback. So it goes around corners pretty well, but you don't have that. If you're really going to push it, you don't have the kind of feedback you would want if you're going to really drive more aggressively. The engine's got enough power. It's actually an all new engine. It's the first application of this new the larger 4-cylinder engine that they're doing for smaller vehicles. So it's, even though, GM has had a 2-liter turbo for several years now, this is an all new design that's more efficient. It's got new variable valve lift and timing system. It's about 15 kilograms lighter than before. And it also has GM's first application on a 4-cylinder of cylinder deactivation, so it can shut off 2 cylinders under light load conditions. And during the time we drove it, I never noticed if it was cycling on or off between 2 and 4-cylinder mode. It was completely seamless. The 9-speed automatic transmission worked really well. It was very smooth. But I don't know, it's just something overall about driving it just kind of left me a little underwhelmed. And I think what it is, is when I think the car that the vehicle I would really compare this most to is actually the Acura RDX. And I think one of the things that kind of bugged me a little bit about this is when you start looking at the pricing for the XT4, it starts at like $36,000.
That's not terrible.
But the one that, the Sport that we drove for most of the day came out to $58,000.
It's starting to get expensive.
Yeah, for a compact premium crossover, it's a bit on the pricey side, especially when you compare it to the RDX. The RDX A spec that I drove back in June was $48,000. It was $10,000 less than this. And it was more fun to drive.
That's what gets. I don't know about the rest of the segment that the XT4 is competing in, but the Acura stuff tends to be like fully loaded for a really great price, and like you said, excellent to drive. Especially when you get the A specs. So that's tough competition. I wonder if. I
think the thing that bugs me about GM's approach to pricing these is, they nickel and dime you on a lot of the things that you would expect should be included in a vehicle like this, especially if you start comparing it to mainstream, like the driver assist stuff, the adaptive cruise control and lane keeping. These are features that are now becoming standard equipment on cars like the Honda Civic and the Toyota Camry, and in fact, pretty much anything with a Toyota badge on it. And on this car, it was an extra $1,500 for that driver assist package.
It makes me wonder if, in their obsessive pursuit of benchmarking the Germans for everything, they've benchmarked some of their practices in terms of pricing options. Where what they really should do is, make it standard, and you know what, just cut your margins to the bone so you can get out there. And their margins are probably like, look, I don't run GM, so.
Well, I wouldn't want them to cut their margins to the bone,
But what I'm saying is,
a premium brand, this is where you make your money.
Right, I get it, but be prepared to undercut your competitors and offer that sort of easy superlative, right? Like, the Germans, they're nice, and we're also nice, but we don't charge you for that stuff. It just comes on every one of them because we feel that it's important. Like that's a real sort of easy thing to separate you from the automakers that you've arguably been chasing for the last 30 years. So I don't know.
There's some nice details, especially inside, like, the pockets along the side of the center console. One of the things that Todd Pollock talked about was, they made them a little bit wider than on a lot of cars, and there's no ridges on the inside. So, if you drop a coin in there, which often happens, you can stick your hand down in there and fish it out. Which is something, you often can't do. So a lot of these things, if you drop something down in there, you're never going to get it out. So little details like that were good, and, the updated Cadillac Q infotainment system is much improved.
Right. Yeah, it has a knob responsive.
Now. It has it's got a center control knob, which is a good thing. And it works better. They've got features like the they've got support for Amazon deliveries. So if you get one of these, if you you can have packages delivered right to the cargo area of the vehicle. The Amazon delivery person will get a one-time code to open up the tailgate, and they'll stick the package in there and close it, and then be on their way. So some nice features like that. But overall, it was totally competent, totally competitive. It just didn't break through in any area.
I mean, and maybe that's just what Cadillac needs. But in the past, we've seen Cadillac struggle when they try to do this stuff, and like it's too bad because the product is generally good, but their sedans are getting killed. You know what I mean?
Well, everybody's are, but yeah, especially Cadillacs. And the CT4 and or the ATS and the CTS are going to be replaced soon by the new CT5. So that'll be coming. I suspect we'll probably see that either at the LA Auto Show or the Detroit Auto Show. See that one coming out. And they're going to have more crossovers added to the lineup as well, just as everyone else is doing.
Yeah, and they need to. So if you want a Cadillac sedan, now is your chance.
Yeah.
And it's all right. So let's talk about the Lincoln, the Nautilus, which is sort of like the same. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. It's just got a nose job on it, but.
So the Nautilus is the artist formerly known as MKX. Lincoln has finally decided that the MK branding across all their vehicles was, shall we say, unsuccessful. And totally random. There was no rhyme or reason to it for the most part, and so they're abandoning that. They're going to names. So the Navigator always had a name, but starting with the Continental, when that replaced the MKS, it got brought back the Continental name. The Nautilus is a new nameplate for Lincoln, and that replaces MKX. When the MKC gets its redesign in the next year and a half or so, it's going to be rebadged as the Corsair. We've got the Aviator.
Corsair, I will just remind everybody, Corsair is an Edsel model name. Okay, moving on.
But I think the association they're going for is the World War II fighter jet, the Navy fighter jet.
Okay. All right. And that was
to go with Aviator and Navigator.
Sure. And I think the Corsair was with that F4U Corsair.
I mean, besides you, who else, who else knows that, that Edsel's had any name but Edsel?
Oh, come on. Ranger, Pacer, Corsair. Those are all Edsels.
All names that have been successfully reused on other vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. All right. So, carry on.
Yeah. So, the approach that Lincoln has taken over the last few years has been interesting. Besides bringing back names, they took a look at what Cadillac and other brands were doing, and they realized that trying to emulate Cadillac's approach of taking on the Germans directly, was going to take way too long. Cadillac's been at this for 15 years. And they still struggle to be taken seriously against BMW and Mercedes and Audi. It's been hugely expensive for them. And it's not an approach that Ford really wanted to make that kind of investment in. So they looked at, what else can we do? And they decided to focus more on executing the vehicles they were going to do really well and really focus on the customer experience. And they've got this whole theme of quiet luxury, so, the vehicles are, they're premium, but they're not ostentatious. They're not trying to be performance vehicles, like a BMW, or a Mercedes AMG or something like that. They're trying to be, trying to create a sense of serenity, and reducing stress for the driver and the other vehicle occupants. And I think, the Nautilus does that. It does that really well. It's not exciting, but, they set out a path for themselves and they've executed on that path. And so, some of the things they did, in addition to the new nose, the new Lincoln face on this thing, which I think actually works really well on this body. They've done things like they added they extended the acoustic laminated glass from the front door windows to the rear door windows, and you've got active noise cancellation, standard equipment on here, and so when you're driving down the road, no matter what road surface you're on. Oh, and this is something I forgot to mention about the XT4. Driving out of Seattle, there's on the first stretch of Interstate 5 out of Seattle, it has a particularly coarse texture to the road, and there was a lot of road noise transmitted up into the XT4. From that road surface, and I mean, any vehicle is going to be noisier on that one, but it seemed unusual for a vehicle like that. Yeah. But so the Lincoln, the Nautilus, in general is a very quiet, serene place to be. But it's also got things like adaptive damping. So when we drove it on some twisting mountain roads, it did surprisingly well. It never wallowed or anything. You bend it into a curve, and it would take a set, and then up to the limits of physics, it would just hang right in there.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess this is my broader question about that though is like, I noticed this when I drove the MKX with the Nano engine. It definitely had plenty of power. Overall, it was, it wouldn't embarrass itself, but it still felt klutzy. Like, it didn't really want to be doing those kinds of things. Like, yeah, okay, I'll hang on through the curve, but I really don't like this. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't a joy to drive in that sense. It was just, it drove like an edge.
I wouldn't say this was a joy to drive, but I think it definitely felt more relaxed doing that. It didn't, it never felt like it wanted to trip over itself or anything like that. It just felt very solid. I mean, it certainly didn't feel nimble, but it did exactly what you would expect of it. It was totally competent, but in a different, in a way that fit with that overall theme. So it's not like it was that it ever gave you any impression that it wanted to be something more. It's like, this is what I am, and I'm going to be really good at it.
Sure. And like, I think that's exactly what Lincoln needs. Like, they don't need to chase Cadillac. They don't need to chase the Germans.
Right.
They need to chase Lexus, which I've said for years. And I think that their product is finally pretty much there. I don't know what the hell they're doing with messaging, and neither do they. But the cars themselves are good. I want to see the MKC get a little better now because,
it's getting replaced pretty soon anyway. So, it's approaching the end of its life cycle.
Yeah. But these are stopgap cars anyway. And the Lincolns are going to get, Lincoln SUVs and crossovers are going to get the new Ford platforms that they just reviewed that we talked about a few weeks ago, a few months ago now.
Starting with the Aviator.
Yeah. So, there's just a spark of life at Lincoln. Let's see if they can make a fire.
And, the base engine, they've dropped the 3.7 liter V6, and it's got the 2 liter turbo in there now, which, is, again, kind of it. When you look at it in the context of what this vehicle is trying to be, 250 horsepower, 258 foot-pounds of torque, that's fine. It's more than enough. The V6, you've got 335, but there's plenty here in this for this vehicle.
Yeah, the thing I didn't like about the Nano was like, it has certainly healthy numbers. It doesn't have that off the line low end torque that the Turbo Forest do now, with that just broad torque curve. And I, maybe it was just the way it felt, but it was like, if I want the power, I really need to poke at it. And it may not be the engine at all. It may just be the way it's calibrated to be responsive. Well,
it might also be the transmission. When you drove it, it had the 6-speed gearbox in there. The Nautilus has Ford's new 8-speed transmission.
Okay.
So I think it certainly felt better in here than it did in the MKX did.
All right. we'll go with that. I mean, I think it's good looking. I'm surprised they got that nose to work with the back end much more successfully than the MKZ. Looks like two different cars.
Yeah, the MKZ, was never really intended to have that face on it. So it's not. Yeah, it's definitely not as well integrated there.
Yeah. Well,
all right.
I mean, I think we've done a podcast. I'm almost out of recording space. So, yeah. Well, I mean, we had to make up for not being around. So hopefully
I'll be around next week. So
right, and I think I will be. I don't know. I do need to go out for another day job thing. But that won't be that long. It'll be a couple of days. So if there's a delay, it's because I'm working hard. But yeah. We'll have another we'll definitely do a podcast next week. I'm looking at the calendar now. So, we'll do one, and I will actually try to finish up another bonus episode that I've had sort of like tinkering away. So we'll have some more content for you folks. In the meantime, you can send us emails and find us on social media and leave us reviews and comments and all of the things. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, and we'll see you next time.